Over 1,000 people have been killed in this conflict, and as the UN Secretary General there said, most of them are women and children. Will Israel now pause, stop and change its rule of engagement?
Every death is a tragedy. In fact, it's not true, by the way, that the majority are women and children. The majority, as far as the figures that we've seen, some 80% are actually men of fighting age. But obviously, every death, every woman, every child, every individual who's not a militant, it's an absolute tragedy. It's a double tragedy. We're sad because of the loss of life, but we're also sad because, unfortunately, Gaza is in the hold of a terrorist organization, Hamas, which is literally putting these people in the front line.
But if we look at the images that we've been seeing of that UN's shelter in Beit Hanun that was targeted, the majority of them were children.
The fact is, if you look at the UN just over the last couple of weeks, we've had 2 cases where the UN has admitted that UN schools have actually been used as storehouses for missiles, for rockets and missiles. And when you think about what that means, you have a terrorist organization that is placing within schools. We've seen houses where civilians and children are booby-trapped. One of the most fundamental humanitarian principles is let us try and leave civilians out of the equation. Unfortunately, you know, when every democracy thinks that the goal of a military is to protect their civilians, we have Hamas that thinks that the goal of civilians is to protect their weapons.
Indeed, but that particular school, the UN has said, and Ban Ki-moon has just said, was full of civilians, and the IDF were given the coordinates for that particular
Once
school.
again, the fact is that particular incident is still under investigation, and the fact is the UN itself is still investigating that incident. It's not clear. What is clear is that it's made absolutely clear that there were terrorist organizations, Hamas firing from the vicinity of the school. So it is absolutely not clear that the casualties, tragic casualties, were caused by Israel. It's worth remembering that some 10% of Hamas missiles never leave the Gaza Strip. They actually land on their own population. It's an absolutely tragic situation.
But your strategy, it's not working, is it? When civilians are killed, when this number of civilians are killed, the strategy isn't working. Israel's strategy is not working.
The fact is, in a situation, there is no democracy that has found a fail-safe way dealing with brutal terrorist organizations that hide in civilian areas. But as we're talking now, Israel has managed to uncover some 30 terrorist tunnels that run from the Gaza Strip under Israel in an attempt to blow up or kidnap Israelis, and managed to decommission them. We estimate that of the 12,000 rockets and missiles that Hamas has in the Gaza Strip, many of them long-range missiles that have been smuggled in from Iran, have actually been
The Iron Dome protects Israeli citizens from these rockets, but the people in Gaza, a densely populated area, do not have that level of protection.
I'm not going to apologize for the fact that more Israelis haven't been killed. The fact is 75% of Israel's population, some 5 million people, have to leave their lives within reach of bomb shelters, and even Iron Dome doesn't work in every circumstances. But as far as the Gaza Strip is concerned, when you think about the miles and miles of concrete reinforced tunnels, some 20% of the building equipment shipped into Gaza for the purposes of building schools and hospitals. Why doesn't Hamas allow people to go and protect themselves in these tunnels?
When you look at these images of children dying, homes flattened, do you pause for a second and think this is not working?
We're absolutely appalled, but we also have to remember that Hamas, unfortunately, is relying on the world to care about Palestinian civilians more than it does itself. We have one side in this equation which is committing a double war crime, targeting our civilians, hiding behind their civilians.
Is Israel committing war crimes?
No, absolutely not.
If civilians are being killed, and the UN has indicated that they're concerned that Israel is committing a war crime, would you say Israel is then committing a war crime?
Israel is engaging in serious attempts, serious legal advice, working closely with other democracies in how to deal with this. But you have to remember that when a terrorist organization hides from behind civilians, saying that you have carte blanche, saying that you have free range to do anything you like, is simply not an option for Israel and not an option for any other democracy.
The Palestinians would say the same, that Israelis, airstrikes against civilians, airstrikes against UN,
I think more and more, and you have to look at public opinion surveys in the Gaza Strip to realize how disappointed people are with the Hamas leadership. They can't speak publicly because they are under threat of gun, they are intimidated. But quietly they realize that Hamas has done nothing to increase the prosperity of their society.
Right now, the Palestinian people have nowhere to go, and rockets are being fired on them day and night.
The fact is, we are making it absolutely clear. We are taking on additional risk. Israeli soldiers, we send in ground troops because shooting from the air is more of a risk. We give advance notice of where we are actually going to be attacking to try and enable
yet a
people.
UN school is hit.
And the fact that if we think about the fact that within the Gaza Strip are 15 to 20,000 Hamas militants with 12,000 missiles, in that situation, to try and limit the amount of damage, the damage that we've done, shows that we've been taking extraordinary care in extremely difficult circumstances.
Ambassador, we'll just keep you there for a second, because I'd like to bring in Mustafa Baghouti, who's a member of the Palestinian Legislative Council and head of the Palestinian National Initiative. He joins me now from Ramallah. We've been speaking to Ambassador Taub here, and he is saying that thousands of rockets are being fired on Israeli civilians. So what will it take for Hamas to stop these rockets?
Yeah, thousands of rockets and nobody is killed. It's a simple psychological warfare that I don't want to see. But in reality, Israel is not just not a democracy, as he claims, but Israel is behaving like a fascist country. When they don't recognize the fact that they are killing children and women and continue the propaganda of defending such unacceptable behavior. And when the racism in Israel and among Israeli leadership reaches a point where a member of Knesset, elite, Shakid, stands in the Israeli parliament and says we should kill all Palestinian women so that they would not give birth to Palestinian children who are snakes.
But at this particular time, the rockets continue. When there is a call for a ceasefire, Hamas continues to fire these rockets.
No, let me explain, and I am aware of all the positions, and I've been talking to them this morning. Hamas and all Palestinian groups are unified in accepting and demanding ceasefire immediately, because we want this horrible attack on our people in Gaza to stop. We want this attack that has killed so far 1,034 people. Mainly 90% of them are civilians, and the fact that a person is a civilian but at an age that makes at an age where he can be in an army does not justify killing him. He's a civilian. We are talking about 6,000 people injured.
What will it take for the Palestinians, the Palestinian leadership, to come to the negotiating table so that their people do not continue to experience this level of bloodshed?
What we need is Israel's acceptance of two things. First of all, to stop immediately their operation in Gaza, to stop the attack on Gaza, to stop the aggression on Gaza, and to accept to lift the siege on the people of Gaza. Because the siege on Gaza is causing the worst humanitarian crisis ever. It has been responsible for the fact that the poverty level is so high. It has been responsible for the fact that 90% of the people cannot have drinkable water according to international standard. It is responsible for the fact that there is a big sewage problem in Gaza. It is responsible for the fact that fishermen cannot fish in the sea.
And the tunnels?
The tunnels were an act of self-defense. They can all be abolished tomorrow if Israel stops these acts. And let's remember that this is not just about Gaza. Gaza is only a small, tiny problem. Everything started with the West Bank, because the whole aggression started by Israel was started in the West Bank, when 27 Palestinians were killed while they were peacefully demonstrating, when Israel conducted an act of collective punishment, arresting no less than 1,000 people, including our members of parliament. And the cause of everything is the occupation. There has been an occupation that has been there for 47 years and has transformed into a system of apartheid and segregation. Israel does not want to stop occupation. That's the problem.
Mr. Taub has said that the people of Palestine are very disappointed in Hamas and the Palestinian leadership. Are you letting your people down by not coming and having serious discussions with the Israelis?
On the contrary, people are disappointed with Israel, not with Hamas or any other Palestinian political faction. In reality, President Abbas has been conducting negotiations with Israel for 21 years. All he got is more expansion of settlements. All he got is a system of enslavement of our people.
Well, he obviously hasn't been very effective.
Israel was the one that broke negotiations that were conducted by Mr. Kerry. So Netanyahu is saying the following. He does not want two-state solution. He does not want one-state solution. So what does he want? A system of enslavement, a system of oppression, a system of apartheid. We will never, ever accept that.
How long will this tit-for-tat continue? If Hamas doesn't stop the rockets, Israel will continue with its airstrikes.
No, Hamas is ready to stop all the rockets. Actually, as I said, these rockets did not kill really people. most of the people who were killed on the Israeli side, and I don't want anybody to be killed, but out of the 44 people killed, 42 were soldiers invading Gaza. Soldiers.
If the Iron Dome
While on the
wasn't there,
Palestinian
more
side, those
Israelis
who
would
are
get
killed are
killed.
women and children.
If the Iron Dome wasn't there, then more Israelis would get killed.
Well, luckily they were not. And we don't want them to die. But on the other hand, when I see an ambassador of a country that claims to be a democracy, who doesn't care about the fact that 1,033 people have been killed, mostly children and women and civilians, when I see a man who doesn't care about the fact that 30 families were completely eliminated, including the father, the mother, the grandfather, the grandsons, the children, they were all eliminated. When I see a man who doesn't care about the fact that 6,000 people are injured, and he thinks that we are subhuman beings, then this is unacceptable. The fact is that Israeli
Mr.
propaganda
Baghouti,
is trying to dehumanize Palestinians
Mr.
to
Baghouti,
justify an
I'll
oppression
just-
that is unacceptable.
I'll just bring in Ambassador Taub as a right of reply.
It's absolutely shocking to hear somebody representing an organization that has deliberately put men, women and children in harm's way to protect its terrorist leaders who are hidden in the basement of hospitals. The fact is, if Hamas was to stop firing
Who is
missiles,
representing them?
Mr. Baghouti,
You don't know me. I am not Hamas.
We don't want a screaming match here, but Mr. Baghouti has said
No,
that,
but don't mislead the public. You know me very
will
well,
stop the
and
rockets.
you can't
The
claim that.
fact is, Israel 5 times over the last few weeks has accepted ceasefires, including the Egyptian proposal supported by the
This
Arab
is
League
not
and
right.
suited the
If you
United
accept
Nations.
ceasefire,
And
why
even
did you
during
ask
those
the United
humanitarian
States to
windows,
veto
we've
the
seen Hamas
ceasefire?
continuing to fire rockets and celebrate the death of Israeli civilians, which of course is something that no Israeli would ever do.
True, because those who are dying are Palestinian civilians, not Israeli civilians, and you cannot mislead the world anymore. The world already knows the facts and the reality. You cannot continue to mislead the world about the fact that you are occupying another people and oppressing them, and this cannot continue. We need our freedom and we are entitled to it.